The critical minerals deal and the rare earth deal, as President Trump has said, is absolutely pivotal. We're very close to the finish line in getting that deal done. And the president said yesterday he'll welcome Zelensky to the White House to sign it or to visit if that's what Zelensky wants to do. I'll check in with NSC this morning to see where it stands, but that's where it stood when I spoke to them last night. Thanks, guys.
And that was Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, announcing that Zelensky is going to be here this week, just days from now, to talk about this mineral deal that we've been kicking around here a lot. And things have been going kind of back and forth, and dueling comments going on between Trump and between Zelensky. And now that it looks like the deal's going to happen, which Trump said a couple of days ago, and to try and make sense of a lot of this chaos and constantly moving targets is Larry the Shirt Johnson, former CIA intel analyst, Sonar21.com, son of a New American Revolution on Substack. Larry, as always, a pleasure to have you back on today.
Hey, I'm always honored by the invite.
Well, listen, let's just get to it, because there's been a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if you would say bad blood, but certainly friction between Trump and Zelensky. A lot of these dueling comments that were going back and forth, with Trump calling him a dictator without an election, and Zelensky saying that Trump was suffering from deception from the Moscow, which kind of are bringing up some of those, I guess, difficult times from Trump's past, where he was accused of being a Russian agent and all that kind of stuff. And now then you had Zelensky just a few days ago, 3 or 4 days ago, I think it was, had an interview on his local media there. And he said, yeah, this whole thing about $500 billion, that ain't happening, because Trump had sent Bissett, our Treasury Secretary, to sign a deal for $500 billion. And Zelensky said no and sent him packing. Apparently, from some people I've talked to, there was a lot of shouting going on at that meeting. So it was made Trump a little bit more angry. And then Zelensky subsequently said, you know what, we're not going to do 500 billion. We're not even going to do 100 billion. I don't know what he's talking about. And now here's Trump saying it's going to be 350. What do you make of all of this stuff?
It is a mess. And, my secret fantasy is that Zelensky arrives, at Dulles or maybe Andrews. Depends on how he flies over. Walks off the plane and gets immediately put in handcuffs. And they slap on what's a sealed indictment for fraud. And that way they will have eliminated one of their big problems in trying to negotiate an end to the war in the Ukraine. But that probably won't happen. Like I said, it's my fantasy. This, I think Trump and Zelensky are still in two different worlds. Trump, genuinely believes that, boy, he's going to get this deal, and Zelensky's going to sign over all these mineral rights that Zelensky doesn't control. I mean, the issue here is, one, his legitimacy to sign anything as by virtue of his status as a dictator. And Trump was absolutely correct in calling him that. But the actual territory where these minerals exist are under the control of Russia, primarily in Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kherson. So, and if Russia continues and to go up to the Dnieper River, they're going to even have a larger percentage of it. And frankly, I don't see Russia's not going to make concessions on that land and say, "Oh, okay, we're sorry, we'll give it back." The Trump folks negotiating this are delusional if they think that's going to happen.
Well, I don't know how much delusion it is, but there certainly are expectations. Mm-hmm. That comment by Caroline Leavitt was earlier this morning, and then subsequent to that, Trump himself was asked at I guess his first public cabinet meeting anyway, had this to say.
President Zelensky is going to be coming on Friday. That's now confirmed, and we're going to be signing an agreement, which will be a very big agreement. And I want to thank Howard and Scott for the job you guys did in putting it together. Really did an amazing job. And that'll be on rare earth and other things. And as you know, we're in for probably $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion.
Now, I've been reading a lot on both Russian and Ukraine Telegram channels back and forth, and you never know how accurate any of these things are, but it's some of the traffic going around back and forth is that Zelensky had previously committed a lot of these privately, a lot of the
Right.
even the potential funds to the British, and so he didn't have them to give. But then now it appears that at least he's going to sign some kind of a piece of paper, and maybe you can talk about whether that's just something to get him through the weekend, or what, however much it translates into reality. But what do you make about the competing, almost like vultures trying to circle to try to get some of the carcass of Ukraine before it goes out of style?
Let's get Mel Brooks back in to make a version of The Producers Part 2, because Zelensky is acting exactly like one of the main characters in that movie, Max Bialystok, who was played initially by Zero Mostel and then in the more recent version with Nathan Lane. And what Bialystok was doing, he was selling shares. Hey, I'm going to sell you shares of stock, and you own all this play. All the money we're going to make of it is yours. And he went and made that deal with like 100 people. So 100 people each owned 100%, which was like 10,000%, and none of them actually owned anything. That's Zelensky. That's what he's doing. He's cutting deal with Starmer. Hey, we got this secret protocol. They wrote it in secret, and you get this, and you get this. Europe has actually got, let's call it, some debt exposure with respect to Ukraine, significant debt exposure, which is why they're trying to save this, to salvage it, because they can't, they're going to come up face to face with the fact that they're going to be bankrupt. But they are going to be bankrupt. There's no way out of this. That's what these people don't understand. And Trump, with all of his confidence and all of his assurances, oh yeah, we're going to sign this deal with Zelensky. I'll believe that when I see it on Friday. And remains to be seen what's actually in the agreement. And no matter what agreement they get, what U.S. company is going to put boots on the ground east of the Dnieper River to start mining? The only mining activity that's going to be going on there is called demining, to pick up all the landmines that have been distributed. But they're not rare earth minerals. So this is a bit of a scam. Now, the United States has poured a lot of money down this rat hole, but we as a nation don't face a problem. BlackRock does. And so there's no telling what conversations have gone on behind the scenes with Scott Bessent and his buddies at BlackRock, because I guarantee you, Larry Fink and Bessent know each other. And Larry Fink at BlackRock has been doing everything that he could to try to save their bacon, because they actually have some significant exposure as well.
And I want to point that headline Gary's showing right there is kind of an important point. At least what's been reported that I saw earlier this morning before we started getting ready for the show is that this is like a big time one-way deal, to where the United States gets a lot of the money, quote, back, not even talking about anything in the future, not any continuing on. Trump said in part of his other remarks on this, he said this was to allow them to keep fighting, which I thought was a bit of a change from some of the other stuff that he'd said before. But it doesn't even imply any security guarantees for Ukraine beyond, well, if we have these resources, then of course we're going to defend it. That's what Mike Walls had said here. But what do you make of that? What's the significance of the fact that there is no strings attached for the U.S. in terms of security guarantees?
Well, if they provide those kinds of security guarantees that Zelensky would want, we would be at war with Russia. It's that simple. And any attempt to insert any U.S. forces or European forces inside Ukraine is going to be seen as a military incursion by Russia, and they will kill them. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos that have surfaced on social media this last week. Russian troops in Kursk are under orders to kill all foreign mercenaries, and they're executing some of the, some they've captured. They're executing them. I mean, the Russians are not playing around on this front, and so Trump thinks, Trump, I think, foolishly believes that he can negotiate a deal. And as he said today, Putin's going to have to make some concessions. Nonsense. Putin doesn't have to do a damn thing. Putin and Russia are not under pressure from the West. They're winning. They don't need us economically. There's not a thing they need. I wrote the other day, in contrast, the United States is reliant on Russia for its fertilizer. It's an amazing number. And we're not totally dependent by any stretch on Russia to supply enriched uranium, but it's still important in our supply chain. And if we've cut it off last August, and it's caused some disruption in the market, but still, the United States is not in a position where it holds anything over Russia's head. And so far, the main concessions that we've seen have come from Trump, not from Putin.
And let's stick with that for a second there also, because one of the other things, and Gary, if you could put that headline back up you were showing, that would be great, in terms of the no guarantees, because it seems that Trump is wanting to, I guess, kind of get all of the positives for his side. And I've not seen a lot where he's wanting to give stuff up. Well, there's another one you see there, that Putin will have to make concessions. U.S. won't make any security guarantees, but what do you think? I want to show you something else, but to really drive this point home, Trump's saying Putin will have to make concessions. But here's an interview that Putin gave a couple of days ago. I think it was a couple of days. It may have even been yesterday, where he was kind of asked about, hey, you've been talking with Trump. He's been talking a lot about this 90-minute phone call you guys had, and you seem to be moving towards some kind of a deal. But then here's what Putin said, and I don't know if you can read the words at the bottom of this as we play it, but I'll recap it if not. But here's what Putin said.
В телефонном разговоре, кстати говоря,
I can read it.
На встрече в Риаде, так чтобы уж совсем предметно, конечно, затрагивать там проблему, связанную с украинским кризисом, но он сам по себе сущностно не обсуждался. Мы только договорились о том, что мы подойдем к этому. Да. Но в этом смысле и в этом случае, конечно, мы отказываемся от участия наших европейских.
Gary, if you can pause that right there. So the first part of that I want to ask you about. He's saying, y'all talked on the phone, but we didn't get into any kind of detailed fundamentals on what we were agreeing to. And so, that is a little bit concerning to me, because Trump has come out and said that he thinks, actually just a couple of days ago when Macron was in town, he said, yeah, I think this could be over within weeks. I think that we're really getting close to the edge here. And it seems to me, and I'm having to interpret and read between the lines, that this conversation was relatively positive, because they were looking at reestablishing diplomatic relations, making that back whole again, and looking at some other things, that the economics, security issues with size of forces and a bunch of other things, but that no details about how the war would come to an end here seem to have been on the table.
Right.
And so it seems Trump has one thing in his mind and Putin has something different in his mind. How do you see that disparity?
But I think we've learned by now that you don't pay attention to what Donald Trump says in public, because a lot of times it's not true, or he's not serious. Like, initially, I'll have that war over in 24 hours. Well, okay, that came and went. Hamas, release all the hostages by Saturday noon, or there's going to be hell to pay. Well, noon came and went. No hell beyond what they've already experienced. So where this stands is based upon the last meeting in Saudi Arabia between Witkoff, Rubio, and Waltz on one side of the table, Lavrov and another Putin advisor on the other side. They agreed to set up 6 working groups. One of those working groups will deal with the issue of Ukraine. So far, that group has not been set up, nor has it met. So there's not going to be any progress with respect to Ukraine until that group is formed, until those talks take place between the experts. and then options are presented to Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two, tomorrow, initially Trump talked about there was going to be a meeting on Tuesday in Saudi Arabia. Well, that didn't happen. The Russians said no, yet we haven't heard anything about that. But Russia has announced that tomorrow there will be a meeting in Riyadh again to discuss normalizing diplomatic relations, getting embassies and consulates back open, making sure they're properly staffed, probably lifting the sanctions on diplomatic personnel that Barack Obama imposed in December of 2016 that have been in place almost for 9 years now. So we could see a lifting on that. But so the progress on peace talks with respect to Ukraine, Trump's on a different, singing from a different sheet of music, and it's not a symphony that the Russians are playing.
Wouldn't you imagine, though, that during that 90-minute phone call that at least Putin would have said, okay, here is my entry point to these negotiations, not the ceiling, but the floor. This is where I will start, and then we can go from there, which, according to what's been publicized anyway, is at the minimum of the 14 June lines from last year with the 4-0 blast and all the things that go along with that. But I haven't seen anything on the Trump side talking about any kind of visibility about what he thinks the end will look like. Don't you imagine that Putin would have laid that out at that meeting?
Yes, and I base that partially on, I guess, a copy, a video emerged yesterday. I saw it on X of the conversation that Emmanuel Macron had with Vladimir Putin on February 20th, 2022. And it was fascinating. I mean, it was the actual conversation between them with, Macron speaking in French, Putin in Russian, simultaneous translation. It's coming across. And you realize what an ass Macron was in terms of, Putin laid it out very clearly what their expectations were, what his concerns were, and they were ignored. I suspect that's sort of what happened with Trump. Putin was very direct. Macron accused Putin of not understanding the law. Putin's a lawyer, for God's sake. Putin more so, which is, doesn't necessarily put him in good repute being a lawyer. I'm with Shakespeare on Kill All the Lawyers, but Putin's very precise with language. He does not use words casually or carelessly because of his legal training. And whereas Trump could be all over the board with his language, and so it may not actually accept or take on board the fact that Putin means what he says. And he's laid it out in June of 2024, and he's not reversed that position. He laid out 6 things very clearly that were going to be preconditions to even start negotiations. And you'll notice that the United States has at least checked 2 of those boxes. They admitted, hey, NATO, no for Ukraine. No NATO for Ukraine. They keep repeating that over and over. We saw at the UN Security Council that the United States put forward a resolution that did not assign blame like it had in the past with respect to the start of the war in Ukraine. And in putting that resolution forward, strong-armed the Europeans to, if you veto this, you're going to suffer consequences. So the Europeans abstained. They said, okay, and coerced Israel into supporting it, because up to this point, Israel had been back in Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that Trump's bringing pressure to Israel on other issues, but on this particular one, it's been the United States that's making the concessions towards Russia in order to signal, yes, we're serious about negotiating. And so far, the Russians say, okay, we'll talk. But they've been screwed with so many times in the past, whether it's talking Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Trump himself bailing out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, INF, George W. Bush walking away from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, It's just the Russians, and then the sabotaging of the peace deal that Russia had reached tentatively with Ukraine back in April of 2022. So the United States and Europe neither have any credibility with Russia. They're not going to take any assurances, verbal or otherwise. They're looking for concrete actions. And
now, on that regard here, I wanted to those who may not have seen it, I want to real quick show you and get your views or your interpretations, probably a better term, on what Putin actually did say on 14 June of last year. I keep mentioning that 14 June lines, but I'm going to contrast that in a second with what Trump has said just last night about how he sees this thing coming to an end. And you're starting to see the contours of a problem emerging here. First of all, here's what Putin said last year.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
So, first of all, what do those terms right there stand out most to you in relation to where the lines are today?
Well, since he made that speech, they've captured significant swaths of territory in Donetsk, moving into Kherson, and they're supposed to undertake the fully recapture of all of Zaporizhia. So, Russia's, from a military standpoint, Russia's stronger and better prepared to take the territory than they were a year ago. So, and when they talk about demilitarizing Ukraine, it means exactly what it sounds like. End their military capability. Turn their army into what would best be described as a border security force, a police force, but not a military force. So they're not going to have an air force. They're not going to have a missile crew, and they're certainly not going to have a drone component in the Air Force. Putin's serious about that. He hasn't, since making that speech, he hasn't sat down and go, I didn't mean that. No, he meant it. He was serious.
Now that's where we're starting to see some potential problems with interpretations of what things mean and where this is going to go. That's why I highlighted that conversation that where Putin said, hey, we didn't even talk about any of these deals, which could have mean either for whatever reason he didn't choose to bring it up during that time, or that Trump may have just bypassed when he said something and just went on to something else, like it didn't click with him or something. I don't know. But what we do know is what Trump has been saying of late. And he seems to indicate that a couple of things. One is he said yesterday that there was that he had talked with Putin, and Putin's cool with European troops as part of a peacekeeping force afterwards, and that we're probably going to go to a ceasefire first. And both of those things were rather decisively shuffled off by Sergei Lavrov, one of which was when he said this.
Deployment of armed troops from NATO countries under any different flag, under an EU flag or under national flags, doesn't change anything. It's unacceptable to us.
Just categorically said it's unacceptable. He also said in a separate conversation, maybe even been this week, where he was asked about the whole issue with the ceasefire, and they said unequivocally, no, we will not stop fighting. Yeah, that's the one right there. That's just on the 24th. We will not stop hostilities. We will only do so when these negotiations give a firm, stable results that suits the Russian Federation. And that's probably reminiscent of what his deputy, Rybkov, said a few days before that, was that all of the June 14th conditions that Putin laid out will have to be accomplished before there's any cessation of hostilities. That seems to be different than what Trump has in mind.
Oh, yeah. And Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, came out and said the exact same thing. So that's why I say you've got to separate what Donald Trump says in public, because a lot of times it's wrong, it's inaccurate, it's reflecting his hopes, his dreams, but not what actually transpired. The Russians are different. And Putin, as I mentioned earlier, by virtue of being a lawyer, takes words seriously, precise words. He's not one to just use some English phrase that he's heard of. I know he knows exactly what he's communicating, and we failed to take him seriously. He made it clear going back to 2007 when he spoke at the Munich Security Conference back then that if you guys persist in trying to bring Ukraine into NATO, we're going to have to do something about it militarily. They've been saying it for 18 years. In the West, thinks he's kidding or think they can finesse him on it. And there's no finessing on this. And there's not going to, Trump can hold his breath till he turns blue, hoping to get a ceasefire. It's not going to happen. Russia will call a ceasefire when they basically exterminated the Ukrainian army.
Okay, so here are the contours of some real problems that are popping up. Gary, if you can pull up from the previous show the Michael Clark soundbite that we played in there, just let me know when you have that loaded up there, because that's I think part of what's a real problem here. What you just described, Larry, about what Putin means when he says the 14 June lines, what Lavrov means, what Peskov, Ryabkov, all those guys, they seem all talking with one mind that all of those conditions have to be met. And those are some very, very stringent deals. It's not talking about just taking the line of contact and just saying, all right, this is it. Wherever we're at right now, Russia gets to keep their stuff, but the other side, we're going to keep going on the other things, doing whatever we want to do. You're saying that according to your interpretation of what Russia has said, that they will take all of those things either by negotiations with Trump or by force of arms with their military, and that they have the capacity. If Trump is thinking that it's going to be somewhere close to the line of contact for the end of it, and then all of a sudden it's a lot further to the west than what he's thinking, and that it also includes the demilitarization, the denazification, according to the terms that you laid out, the reduction of the Air Force or elimination even of it, whatever those terms are, those are some very, very severe issues. The European Union to this day continues to say they're going to keep going on. They just yesterday met in Kiev and offered all kinds of additional military equipment, ammunition, support, training, all kinds of other stuff, lots of cash, etc. So those two things are diametrically opposed, and they cannot both be done. And so the question is going to be, what happens if Russia imposes its will, because Trump doesn't end up agreeing to it? Because here's what Michael Clark was saying about where the British are going.
And this comes at a time in which Keir Starmer is talking about potentially putting troops on the ground in Ukraine. Are we talking about an increase, a substantial increase, in the size of our physical armed forces?
I doubt it at the moment. I mean, the army's 72,000. It's due to go down to 70, which is very small. They may take it up a little bit. I don't think we're talking about a much bigger army. If you're talking about an army that was capable of doing all the things the government really wanted to do, you'd be going back to an army of, 110,000, something like that. And bear in mind, it used to be, at the end of the Cold War, it was 180,000, of whom 60,000, 55,000 were the British Army of the Rhine, just sitting in Germany. But we are where we are, 70-odd thousand. The idea, if you look at the head of the army, Rolly Walker, I mean, he's the new chief of the general staff, he says, we have got to be prepared for a big event in 2027, 2028. We can't wait till the 2030s. We don't know what that big event might be, but a strategic challenge of a war-fighting sort. That's the sort of thing he talks about. And he says, we've got to be able to make a brigade, which is a basic unit of about 5,000 troops. We've got to double its combat power by 2027 and treble it by 2030 without an increase in people.
Now, I've heard from other sources that I have in London that they actually think that there's going to be a negotiated settlement by whatever terms in the near term, 5 to 6 months from now. They think whatever it is, that once it's over, that Russia will actually start planning on attacking Europe after that. So you heard Clark there saying this big event. I'm told that's what they think. So they think they're getting ready for that right now. If Russia doesn't just agree to something, in the near the line of contact, but they actually go on and conquer more territory, that's going to give rise to all of those fears. And now then they're going to, I think we have the very real possibility of creating a new Cold War that could all too easily lead to a hot war. How do you see that?
The Europeans are a joke, not the people. But you have to blame the people in part because they've selected these crazy leaders, these incompetents, these toothless little pugs. They got their nose smashed in and they go around thinking that they're a giant Rottweiler, and they're not. They're barely the size of a miniature Mexican Chihuahua. They have no military clout. They would have trouble fighting the Ethiopians, okay? But to go stand toe-to-toe with the Russians, they're dreaming. And so here are the Europeans, it is so ridiculous that even people are talking about it as if it's serious. They have no industrial capability. They cannot even produce the weapons that have been used to keep, like Ukraine, supplied right now with artillery shells. They have admitted that even if all of Europe and the United States came together and pooled their resources and tried to produce artillery shells as just one measure, they could not match what Russia by itself is turning out. So it's like, can everybody wake up from these delusional nightmares and recognize that all this brave talk on the part of the Europeans and belligerent talk that they're gonna send troops on the ground? Send them. I encourage you, send them. Send Boris Johnson while you're at it. Send Annalena Baerbock while we're at it. Send Ursula von der Leyen while we're at it. Send them all. And you know what? If they go in militarily, they're going to die. Russia is not playing around. Russia, this is existential, and the West better damn well understand that, because what Russia's seen over and over is every time they've tried to give the West the benefit of the doubt, we lied, we betrayed. We used that time in Minsk II to build up Ukraine so it could attack Russia. Russia understands that now. They realize, man, we were bamboozled.
Well, now it appears to me, and I'm just picking some information up that I have in different places and kind of trying to look at it in context and how this is fitting together. There has been a reduction in the pace of the Russian armed forces advance in the West, especially in the Pokrovsk area. It's picked up in the Kursk area, but it's kind of slowed to a snail's pace in some of the rest of the areas. While it maintains fighting, it's slowed down over the last month and a half. There has been some suggestion in many of the Russian circles that I follow on Ukraine, some Russian bloggers, the Military Review, etc., that they're suggesting that this may be Russia stockpiling up its combat power, that if they don't get the outcome they want at these negotiations, then they're going to spark something even bigger that we've not seen so far. This actually that I'm showing on the screen right here, this is from, I believe it's Russian Military Review, but they're saying that Russia has accumulated a reserve of 200,000 for an offensive on Kharkiv or Dnipro, that is in some areas there. And if anybody's tempted to say, well, that's just Russia propaganda, it's not actually true, this comes just a few days after Zelensky himself claimed that there was 150,000 Russians massing in the north part of his budget in this same area, north of Kharkiv, that included armored divisions that had been equipped and fully staffed and trained, but had not yet been in combat, i.e. they were completely fresh units. Do you give credence to the possibility that Russia has been just keeping pressure on the line of contact, but building capacity that in the event that they don't get in negotiations, they can quickly seize this stuff in ways maybe we haven't seen since the opening round of the war? No, not really, because whatever pause there was in the last 4 or 5 days, they've actually been accelerating operations, particularly around Pokrovsk. They took
they took 5 different villages and towns just yesterday. I follow Murat Karulin. He is a war correspondent. Comes highly recommended by Andrei Martyanov. And Murat gives very detailed accounts of what's going on. So, I think for the Russian general staff, they're pressing ahead. They're not under any time schedule. They don't have. There's no pressure for them to bring this to a close, because part of their demilitarization is it causing the attrition of the Ukrainian army, and in the process causing the attrition of the West. The operation in Kursk was really a British operation, backed and encouraged. And the Russians they're killing British, American, and Polish mercenaries. They're not getting out alive. They're being executed because of war crimes that they committed. And it's just, it reminds me of stories I heard from veterans of World War II when I was much younger, that when Japanese soldiers would lay and pretend to be dead and then would detonate a hand grenade and kill Marines stopped taking prisoners. They just started killing them. They were, there was no more Geneva rules. That's how you want to play, that's how we're going to play. That's how the Russians are now treating these folks. So Russia militarily, they're giving the West a chance. Hey, you want to stop this? This is how you stop it. Cut off, stop sending military aid, stop training, stop enabling the Ukrainians to kill our people. Well, the Europeans aren't doing that. So Russia's going to keep the pressure on. They're not going to stop. And they're giving the United States a chance to back out. But, I think, frankly, I think this is going to blow up on Trump, because there is so much hatred in the United States against Trump for betraying the Ukrainian, the so-called democracy in Ukraine. I mean, you've got political leaders that say that nonsense with a straight face on both the Republican and Democrat side. And when the end comes, and will come swiftly, then all of a sudden the recriminations that will be directed against Trump, well, you lost Ukraine.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. And then the last few minutes we have here, how do you see this playing out? And let's just say within the next month, let's keep it kind of short. Zelensky comes in on Friday. He signs a minerals deal, whatever the number is, it doesn't even matter. Then he goes back, and then these Riyadh meetings take place the next day. And at some point, Russia is going to present, here are our terms.
Yeah.
Concrete presentation. This is it right here. And then Trump is going to have to be faced with agreeing to those draconian terms in comparison to anything that's ever been offered before. He'll either have to accept everything, and then he would be excoriated, just as you said, for literally just signing a blank check over to Putin, or he'll be faced with rejecting that, and then the Russian military will just continue to move forward, or it'll hit a big one, this 200,000 troops, whatever, the ones that Zelensky talked about, I don't know. But whether it's a big wave, a flood that comes over, or the continue on going on, at some point they're just going to break and lose all of their forces. And then now Trump's got to deal with not just the so-called abandonment of Ukraine, but now he physically oversaw the physical defeat of Ukraine. How do you see that playing out in the Trump administration?
Yeah, he's going to be. I think he's going to voice increased frustration in the next 3 or 4 weeks over what he'll view as the slow pace of negotiations. Maybe even come out and accuse Russia of foot dragging, and will be generally revert back to some of the hostile language directed at Russia. It really, I'm completely baffled by the animus in the United States directed at Russia. I was talking to one of my retired DEA buddies the other day, and we have a mutual friend who just retired from the CIA, last year. And now this retired CIA guy, he was chief of station in several places. He was a senior intelligence service, so like an equivalent of a general officer. And I saw him sort of a reasonable, sensible guy, but boy, he's still doing contract work for the CIA. He is livid about Trump. Oh, he's selling out. I fought those bastards for 40 years, referring to the Russians. And in his mind, he couldn't understand that Russia today is not the Soviet Union of 1989 or 1990. It has rejected the communist, atheist ideology that was governing the Soviet Union, and it is now a nationalist Christian country. That's what it is. Christianity is at the core, deeply held belief in Christianity, and yet, despite tremendous ethnic diversity in Russia, they find a way to live in harmony with the Muslim population, with the Hindu, they got 140 different ethnic groups. So Russia's found a way to manage that and to do it without having, despite continued Western efforts through our intelligence organizations to try to foment discontent and unrest. So, but here's this guy. He doesn't understand how Russia has changed. He's not the only one. I guarantee you there are people at senior levels in the Department of Defense, throughout State Department, throughout the intelligence community that still hold those crazy beliefs.
Okay.
And the media keeps
I'm
repeating
sorry, I
it.
got to interrupt you there because we've got queued up here like the poster child for everything that you're describing right now. And
let's not forget America. Maybe there are some who say enough already. If we give in to Putin now, America will inevitably pay the price later. That's what history has shown. When you give in to thugs, when you give in to dictators, you pay the price. Hasn't Donald Trump and his allies learned the lessons of history? This struggle is in every way about the ultimate security of the American people.
Wow, that I didn't know that. It's a good thing that the senator there explained that. So now it's so easy to understand. And now if Trump can just change all of his policies to make that a reality, how great the world would be, right?
Yeah, Trump is Neville Chamberlain in their minds, and but Putin. Let's everybody step back and look. What other countries has, quote, Putin invaded? Russia has not been an expeditionary military force. Its military operations have been on its borders. They were attacked by Georgia in 2008, and they responded to that attack and wiped it out pretty quick. And that was a NATO-backed, NATO-sponsored event.
And by the way, I always found it noteworthy that in that 2008 Georgia issue, it was what was South Ossetia and what was the other, Abkhazia, the provinces where all that took place. They didn't just take over the whole country and invade the whole thing. They neutralized the threat that they had there, and then that's it. They stopped on that. So that that was interesting as well. Yeah, no, and it's the Putin in particular understands, having lived in Germany. Russia doesn't want to take that over. God, who needs that headache? Europe is a declining power. They don't realize yet that they're really no longer relevant. They used to be major players in the world that, you would care what the French or the British or the Germans said. Not anymore. They're not resource rich on anything. They've got, even their intellectual capital is declining in terms of what, let's look at all the breakthroughs they made in computing. Oh, yeah, they didn't. So, they're not a technological giant of any sort. They don't have natural resources, and frankly, their militaries are a joke. And I know, listen, I've caught some hate mail from people living in those countries. Well, if you can't handle the truth, too bad, but that's the truth. And I'm not saying America is all that great, because what this war in Ukraine has exposed is the real limits of the United States in terms of our inadequacy on a variety of fronts, and yet we still continue to pretend that we can accomplish all these military missions when in fact we can't. Yeah, and hopefully that the Department of Defense is going to start retrenching some of that and just sealing off, not just Doge coming in and just cutting personnel, but actually shedding unnecessary missions like the one in Syria, for example. And I'm told that also we may be even significantly reducing our European footprint. So we'll see how all that develops, but we'll definitely be watching again very carefully what happens when Zelensky comes to town, what further things come out of this meeting in Riyadh that's apparently going to happen tomorrow with the Russians. A lot going on, a lot of moving pieces. We'll stay on top of it here for you. And just kind of as a little teaser here, I won't go into any more detail, but we may have Larry on next week in a very unusual location with some very interesting things to say. I guess I'll just leave it there, but you're not going to want to miss that when it comes. Be watching.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope.
I do too. Yeah. So I don't want to say anything until it actually happens anyway, but if everything comes to pass, we're going to have a really interesting conversation with you probably the next time we see it. But thank you very much for coming on today, Larry. Always a pleasure to have you.
Hey, thanks for the invite, Danny.
And we thank you guys too. Also, as a reminder, I hadn't said anything in a while. We are on podcast now. We're not just on YouTube. We have Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will find us waiting there for you, because I know a lot of you guys really like podcasts and don't always have time to watch the videos, but we want to make sure you get your unintimidated and uncompromised Daniel Davis Deep Dive on the issues that matter most to your life. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.